Hey guys, it's Billy with HBL Today, and today we're going to talk about buyer's guide on the Ferrari 458. This is actually my car, so this would be great because I've had a ton of experience with this car. Also, if you like our videos, please make sure you like and subscribe and turn on all notifications. So, a little background, this is my personal car. It's kind of been a lot of headache for me. I got this car in 2019. I actually sold it to a client on consignment. And the engine blew up as soon as I sold it to the client. So I bought the car back from the client, and we got the car running about 8 months ago. So it's been a little bit of a process, but inside that process I learned a lot about some of the issues with the car that weren't so common and that were common. And this car actually has 52,000 miles on it. I was daily driving it, so it's pretty reliable now that we fixed some stuff. But we're just going to cover all the stuff I've experienced with it, and then stuff that you might see that's common or not so common with this car. One of the things I'll start with on the interior is the twilight sensor. The sensor is actually right here in the windshield, and it's quite challenging to fix because the way this mirror is designed, you have to pull it down. Well, in some cases when you remove the mirror, you can actually break the windshield to replace the sensor. So it's something that if, it's being repaired, hopefully the service shop, or if you're doing it yourself, just has some good luck removing this piece. Remember, it goes forward, not down. And that can crack the windshield. So it's just something to think of if you're having this repair done. Let's be a little air allowing dash this twilight sensor. As far as the inside of the car, in some of the earlier models, I haven't confirmed it with the newer models because I'm just speaking of our experience. There are some issues with the HVAC system where you can have delays turning on the system. You may turn it on, let's say, full heat on both sides, and it may never actually turn the heat on. And to repair that, you essentially have to take the whole dash apart and replace the fan motor assembly and sometimes the control switches. So that's kind of a not super common issue, but we've seen the early models. In fact, this car has an issue, so we're going to have to remove the dash and replace all the assemblies involved with that. A notorious problem for Ferraris is sticky buttons. As you can see here, they're not super sticky, but they're getting there. Now, I haven't seen it like in a ton of these, but I've seen it. I think it's just a common problem with Ferrari. Obviously, you can talk with sticky buttons or sticky RX and have them replaced, or do other methods, but it's not a cheap repair if you do it that way. It's pretty expensive. We just did a California, and I think it was around $6,000 for everything, so it can be quite challenging. Another thing is this, the window switches are common to break. This one actually is broke now. There's just a little clip in here that breaks, and it causes the switch to come out. I just haven't replaced on my car because I honestly haven't had the time. I really haven't had time to mess with it, but that's just another kind of common issue. You can see here, I haven't seen this actually happen before. I don't know if it's just my car or not. There's just a little crack here in the volume button. I don't know if that's necessarily common or if it's just how my car ended up. And then obviously the leather on the dash, which is kind of common with these Ferraris. You can see somebody had replaced it previously, and there's a little bit of an issue there, but this specific area tends to peel up. I think it's just mainly related to direct sunlight. Again, I've seen on quite a few of these, so that's probably a more common issue. As far as the inside goes, I think that pretty much covers my experience with these. There may be other issues on the interior, but for the most part, it's pretty good. Well, one thing is the headliner. If you look here, mine's actually missing. It got hot and I guess fell down, so we're gonna have to reapply that. I haven't seen a ton, but it happened on this car, so that's something to think about. Just make sure it's compact and tight like it should be if you're looking at a car. But that pretty much covers the interior as far as issues I personally ran into. Another thing to talk about, which is I guess kind of interior related, is the trunk latch. One day we were working on the shop and we saw smoke coming from the trunk latch assembly, and it's a pretty common issue with these cars, and we replaced it. But the trunk latch can actually fail, and a lot of times what you'll notice is you keep blowing fuses in the fuse box. That means you're on your way to have an issue here. I replaced the fuse not knowing that that was an issue with this car, and it started smoking one day, and I said, wait a minute, that's not good. Turns out the latch assembly had shorted out, and for some reason a fuse didn't blow, and it could have been a fire. So that's a common issue with these cars as well. Obviously too, when you're buying one of these cars, you'll see here in the trunk, or bonnet as you call it, I have an extra couple pieces because I converted my mirrors to the Specialty Carbon. But you want to have the owner's manual. The leather strap here actually broke for the toolkit. We've got to replace it. A lot of times it breaks right here, but you can see it's starting to fatigue here as well. And you know, this is a big selling point, is having all the manuals. Oh, here's the actual strap. So you can see right here what broke, and this is the old piece. So we've just got to fix that. Somebody looks like before I shortened this a little bit and tried to reapply it again, and it still broke. So it's, you know, not terrible, but when you own a Ferrari, you kind of want these things to be right. On a side note, this comes in your toolkit. If you ever have an issue with the F1 transmission, which we'll talk about, this allows you to pop the car in neutral and move the car around and whatnot. So, and then, you know, just another little couple bits and pieces. There's the cabin air filter. You know, when you're looking at a car, you want to make sure it's clean and whatnot. Check the brake fluid, make sure it's been flushed. Should be done every 2 years on these cars. Basically, if it gets moisture in there and gets past 2%, it can become hygroscopic and cause deterioration of brake lines and whatnot. That's pretty common for all cars, but it's just another point to look at when you're looking at one of these cars. And as you can see here, this latch is still somewhat challenging, but because it's my car, I don't always have time to work on it. Headlights, not super common, but I've seen where the LEDs will actually come detached during the assembly and fall out. I haven't had that issue yet, and I haven't actually replaced the headlights, but I could assume it's probably several $1,000s to replace those on this car. Another, I guess it's not necessarily a problem, it's just a cost of ownership. So you look at my brake rotors, they're actually gyro disc brake rotors. Carbon ceramics are pretty expensive on these cars to maintain. You actually measure those by weighing them, and then obviously you want to inspect them for cracks or any damage on the carbon disc. But that is something that you want to check out if you're purchasing one, just to make sure that you're not going to have to spend $20,000 on a brake job on the car after buying it. Moving forward, on the 2010s, I haven't confirmed if it's on the newer models, which this is a 2010. The fender liners had an adhesive in them, and due to all the engine compartment heat, it would cause the adhesive to catch on fire and actually be a fire hazard, and some cars actually burn to the ground over it. So that's just one thing to check out if you're looking at 2010. Make sure the adhesive has been removed from the liner, so the recall has been performed. But nothing too major, it's just something you want to look at and make sure isn't going to be a problem. Going to the engine compartment, as you can see, there's a couple panels missing from mine because it's still a work in progress. There's a couple issues. In 2011 and 2012, they had some crankshaft issues, which is weird. I never saw any information on 2010s. So you would think that'd be a case, but I think it's just a manufacturing issue, and it did lead to some engine failure. Again, I haven't had that occur in the shop, but it is a known issue with these cars. Moving forward, the secondary pump, I have seen some issues with those failing. Not super common, but I have seen them fail. In fact, on this car, we replaced it. Another thing too is the exhaust manifolds. The stainless steel braided flex joint here, I have seen those fail and leak. It's not a terrible issue, but it is expensive to fix. So I've seen that before. The intake manifold actuator is a very common problem on these cars. Essentially what happens is, and Ferrari generally charges $10,000 to replace these, is these will, there's bearings in here and they will end up seizing up and causing this mechanism down here not to open. Now, in the case of my car, we actually took it apart, lubed all the bearings, and everything was intact, and it operated like it should. The flaps didn't have any resistance, but because the flaps were stuck previously, it caused the actuators underneath to fail. So you're probably looking at a $2,500 repair, you know, if the bearings haven't failed, re-greasing those, cleaning up the actuator, and replacing the actual actuator valves on the bottom. Because most likely if the manifold actuator is stuck, the actuators are going to fail underneath. Going forward, the coolant tanks, I have seen these get hot and cracked. This one is actually the original one. It hasn't failed yet. So that's not a problem on my car, but I assume at some point that'll need replacement. And also with it being higher mileage, some of these plastic fittings, coolant hoses, vacuum lines, I have seen those fail. That can obviously cause vacuum leaks, coolant leaks. Just kind of an age thing that's going to happen in any car. Valve cover gasket leaks, I've seen that happen as well. You obviously don't want that leaking, because if it leaks past the heat shield, it can get on the manifold, cause a fire. It's not a situation you technically want to deal with on something like this. But overall, it's a pretty reliable car. Maintenance on these cars isn't too terrible. You don't have the belts, so you don't have to worry about that. You're pretty much just looking at fluids, plugs, and filters on these cars. So it's pretty reasonable. Generally, you just want to make sure that whoever's owned the car previously has had it serviced correctly and there's nothing due for replacement on the car. A big issue, though, we need to talk about is F1. In 2010 to 12, there was a harness. It would become dislodged in the gearbox and cause the transmission to skip, have issues, and if it fully becomes disconnected, cause the system to basically fail and not operate. What Ferrari was doing was replacing the whole gearbox assembly, but we've actually developed a way to disassemble the gearbox and repair the harness. You're probably looking around $10,000 for that versus $40,000 for a replacement of the whole transmission assembly. They also updated the software in 2012, which made the gearbox shift and actuate a little bit better. So that's something that can be done on a 2010. It's just something that you need to have a record of. If it hasn't occurred, it's something you can just have done at the Ferrari dealership. Another thing just to think about is the exhaust valves. A lot of these cars have aftermarket exhaust, and the valves are actually right here on the rear bumper. I have seen in some cases where they get hot and melt. If those things aren't connected to the exhaust, it can cause the car to go in limp mode. It's very frustrating because it's not consistent, and it won't even throw a check engine light for it half the time. It'll just say, you know, limp mode, you can't go over 3,500 RPMs, and it's just a complete headache. On this car, we actually unhooked them to bypass them, and that wasn't an issue we were dealing with. Now, there may be a way to code that out or program the car, but in this case, we just hooked the valves back up, and it's resolved that issue. So one other thing that we need to consider too is the shocks on these cars. A lot of times people put a lowering kit on these cars, and what'll happen is when you're installing the lowering kit, the actual cool sleeves will seize up. So one of the tricks is spraying penetration oil on it and letting it soak and then heating it up with a torch. A lot of times that will help unseize the coilover sleeve. And then the shocks itself will tend to start to leak on these cars. It's pretty common for them to leak, and then if it fails, it will throw a suspension error light on the car. But generally speaking, the issues don't generally occur until the car is lowered. I have seen them leaking prematurely without being lowered, but when you lower it, it tends to cause the shock to fail prematurely. In this case, this car is lowered because we kind of used it as a test mule to see what didn't work and did work. But it's one of those things I'd recommend if you're going to lower it, at some point you're going to need to upgrade to coilovers. And also I'd recommend putting some anti-seize on the threads if you do lower the car, so the next time you don't run into that. But that pretty much covers all the common or uncommon issues. In fact, the most uncommon issue is the reason my engine failed was the camshaft lobes got wiped out. And I haven't seen that in a very long time in a modern engine. We believe this car may have had an oiling issue or something along those lines, but we replaced the camshafts when we rebuilt it, and you know, obviously we use Motul engine oil, and we haven't had any issues since. We don't anticipate seeing any more of those. But all in all, these are a pretty good car. Obviously, you want to do some due diligence, have a pre-purchase inspection. If you purchase it from us, every car is serviced in our shop with the specialists that we have here that work on these cars. And we also provide a report of stuff that needed to be addressed and stuff that we fixed. So if you're looking at one of these, we'll be happy to provide you that report. And just a reminder, some of you that don't know this, the clutch isn't serviceable in this car. It's not like the previous F430. You don't have to replace the clutch in these cars. So they're probably thought of as the most reliable mid-engine Ferrari you can buy. And it's also a desirable car because it's the last mid-engine platform that doesn't have turbos. So if you've been watching the market, these cars have significantly increased in value because of that, because the more purist people don't want the turbos. So if you're looking at a Ferrari that you want to drive that's going to be for the most part reliable and a great investment, I'd highly recommend the Ferrari 458 because they're not making any more of these. With that being said, if you have any questions, please comment below. If you have any other videos you want to see from us, let us know. We're trying to make great content for YouTube, and please remember to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.